Is adding AI agents to JD Edwards still a huge custom project, or is it becoming much easier because of the platform behind it? And if AI agents can work directly with your JDE data, workflows, and security, what does that change for your team? In this episode, Kevin Van Horn from ERP Suites explains how OCI, AIS, orchestrations, dashboards, and real time JDE connectivity are making AI agents more practical for JD Edwards users. By the end, you'll understand why the platform matters, what makes this different from a generic AI tool, and how to decide where an AI agent actually makes sense in your JD Edwards environment. Welcome back to Not Your Grandpa's JD Edwards, the podcast for JD Edwards teams that are modernizing, improving operations, and asking better questions about what comes next. I'm your host, Nate Bushfield, and today we are talking about a question a lot of JD teams are asking right now. Is adding AI agents to JD Edwards actually easier than it used to be? The answer depends a lot on the platform behind the agent. If you have to replicate your data, build a separate data lake, create new security rules, and run AI outside of JDE, that can get complicated fast. But when the agent is built to work with JD Edwards in real time, the conversation changes. Joining us today is Kevin Van Horn, an AI expert from ERP Suites, to talk about how ERP Suites is using OCI, AIS orchestrations, and JDE native workflows to make AI agents much more practical. Kevin, welcome back to the show. Now a reoccurring guest. So
Thank
let's
you.
start with a little bit of background for the people that maybe didn't catch your episode a few weeks ago.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's great to be back, Nate. So thank you for having me. I've got World Cup fever and I got a new pair of glasses, right? So, at my age, these are small victories. Yeah, so I'm the managing director here at ERP Suites, related to our artificial intelligence, our agents. I've got about 34 years of experience with JD Edwards. I was a customer. And then I joined JD Edwards back in 1994, and I stayed through the Oracle years until um, essentially 2020. And since then, as Oracle decided to shift to the cloud, I decided I wanted to get back and serve the JD Edwards user community. So I'm thrilled to be here at ERP Suites, and thanks for having me back.
Yeah, of course. We're thrilled to have you at ERP Suites. Let me tell you, it's great to have these conversations about AI, and it makes it a lot easier when our team is growing. So let's start here.
Sure.
Why does the platform behind an AI agent matter so much for JD Edwards customers?
Yeah, yeah. And honestly, the platform is the game changer, right? It is that whole new ball game, right? Um, an agent's only as good as the platform it's built on and the connection to JD Edwards, right? Um, the platform decides, if that connection is smooth, if it's real time, or you have to go through all kinds of different steps to make that agent work, right? Um, the idea behind this is the simpler the better, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The more complicated an AI agent gets to develop and deploy, the harder it is to use and maintain, right? So, a lot of, generic AI tools, are going to want to copy your JD Edwards data, right? Not use your JD Edwards data as that single source of the truth, right? And that's, we talk about that all the time, right? Um, you know, having having the agents built on OCI, right, is a market leading, um, tool from Oracle, that gives us all the different tools we need to develop agents that are powerful and that work with JD Edwards, right? So,
Mm.
the idea is, not to replicate JD Edwards, but to give JD Edwards the superpower it needs, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So you're saying they're like the agents are built in OCI
Yeah.
and they're really built to work with JD Edwards in real time instead of using like a replicated server or something like that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, 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 exactly. And when I said it's built in OCI, OCI just means Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, right? It's a it's a big long name that Oracle turned into its acronym, which is usual, right? But simplest term, that's where the agent lives and works, right? Um, it gives our agents, the OCI has that toolkit that helps us um, develop, build the agents, right? But it also gives things like intelligent document processing, so it can read PDFs and understand the data within it, right? It gives us the ability to create dashboards and analytics, and those AI services, right? But um, so the agent kind of lives there in OCI, but JD Edwards can stay right where it always has been, right? Right where it needs to be, to help you run your business. So you don't have to drag JD Edwards over to OCI, or vice versa from that standpoint.
Yeah.
So it's the easiest way is OCI is where the agent lives and works, and JD Edwards is where the business happens. Right?
Yeah. That's perfect. So, what role does AIS play in making this easier?
Yeah, yeah, and that's a great question. I mean, AIS application interface services, right? It's a server that 99% of JD Edwards customers already have. It's basically the doorway into JD Edwards, right? And like I said, the good news is uh, almost every JD Edwards has it, right? Because JD Edwards, was really kind of meant to work with other systems, right? So, most of our customers integrate JD Edwards with other third-party systems, so and they utilize this kind of AIS server process, right? So, um, the that AIS server allows our agents to have that real-time conversations with JD Edwards, right? Pulling those live data in and out, right? It keeps the agent working from what's true real time right now, not stale replicated data, right? And so it skips that data copying and it allows JD Edwards to continue to be that single source of the truth, right? No parallel systems, no parallel data, no trying to keep things in sync. The agent's working off of real live JD Edwards data.
Right. So, is that the main difference between working with a bolt on solution or a generic AI agent solution? Like when they're utilizing replicated data or even data lakes, is that the main difference there? Is that it just takes more time because you have to replicate your data from JD Edwards, move it from here to there, and then move it back? Is that the main difference, or is there a little bit more to that?
I think there's a little bit more to that. I mean, clearly you touched on an issue, right? JD Edwards is you know, but depending upon your business, right, and the type of processes that you run, there can be a lot of data, right? Yeah, so just moving that data, yanking that data out of JD Edwards, and that's no small task, right? Um,
Yeah.
but so yes, that is one of the issues. The other issue though that I think about more is that how fresh is that? How often do you have to do that, right? If you're talking about things like sales orders or account reconciliations or things of that nature, where an agent can really do a lot of have the heavy lifting for you. Um, how often would you have to replicate that data in order for that agent to work on real live data, right? So so yes, part of it is that replication process, but the bigger kind of more fundamental or philosophical reason is why do you want two sources of the truth, right? Or why do you want to have two separate sets of data that you're trying to figure out where to work from, right? You know, we know JD Edwards is where you do business, so let the agent work where you do business, right? And so that to me, that's the bigger issue, right? You never are worrying about old stale data.
Yeah. It saves time, it saves the headache.
Yes.
There's so many issues that can happen when you're replicating that data. Maybe that data isn't as fresh as you think. Maybe there's a change that happens in the time that you're working with it. There are so many things that can go into this where to be able to work on your JD Edwards natively will save you not only time, not only effort, but it'll save you the headache and the heartache of getting something wrong because something has changed in
I
that
mean,
amount of time.
think about it. One of the things we always talk about when it relates to our agents is, you know, them being digital workers, right? But
Mhm.
they work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? So they're not going home at 5 o'clock, right? They're not coming back at 8 in the morning, right? Um, they're working in the middle of the night. They're working when orders are coming in. Or they're working when JD Edwards programs are running, on a schedule or overnight. They're checking all that information. If the data is outside of JD Edwards, how does that work? Right? I mean, there's so much overhead that would have to make you would have to put in place in order for an agent to truly do its job the way that you want it to do its job if you're having to replicate that data at, any given point of time, because that agent's always working.
Yeah, and you bring up such a great point of because it's working 24/7, you would basically have to have someone also working 24/7 to just keep replicating the data. And
Right.
that cuts away the main purpose of an AI
Yep.
agent, which is to stop the overtime.
Right.
It's just to stop the overworking of some of these people.
Right, right. Or you just have to make the decision to say, well, I have an agent that can work 24/7. I just can't let it work 24/7, right? Which
Mhm.
kind of defeats the purpose as well, right?
Exactly. So we're talking a lot about OCI right
Yeah.
now. Does having AI agents on OCI mean that your JDE has to move to the cloud, or what does that look like?
No, 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 no. That's the great part about that, right? It's you don't have to have any cloud migration to start playing or using our AI agents. I mean, obviously, if you want to, that's great, right? Your JD Edwards can live on-prem, it can live in a private cloud, it can live in a public cloud like OCI or AWS or wherever it's hosted today, right? The agent runs on OCI, no matter where JD Edwards lives, right? Um, the connection is always through that AIS server, and the orchestrations that server calls in order to reach out and touch JD Edwards, wherever it might be. So, and you brought up a cool point before, and it was like, when I think about it, this conversation is like, yeah, I want the great JD Edwards customers to realize that that the AI agents, you're closer than you think, right? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like all the things that you have set up to make your JD Edwards, run your business the way you want to run your business. It's the same things that our AI agents utilize to actually give you that superpower to JD Edwards, right? There's really not much you have to change, right? It's like
Yeah.
wherever your JD Edwards live, whether you're running it on an iSeries or you're running it on a public cloud or wherever it lives. If you have an AIS server, and you're, at least on a more modern
Yeah.
release, and where you have orchestrations, our AI agents can start running today.
Yeah, you don't need that full cloud migration just to start exploring AI agents.
Oh,
You can start it right now
yeah,
on on an updated tools release. Yes, you need orchestrations, but that is a very common thing that people have in
sure.
this day and age.
Yeah.
And hell, if you don't have orchestrations right now, you should probably look into it because the orchestration saves you a tremendous amount of time. And yes, so do AI agents, and that really does open the door. But I mean, shoot, like you
Yeah.
need orchestrations in your business these days.
Sure.
But talking about how things are a little bit easier,
Yep.
how does using GD security and workflows make AI agents even easier to adopt?
Yeah. If you think about, why people would be hesitant about AI agents, security is probably the thing they get nervous
Yeah.
about, right? If you
Mhm.
think about it, it's I've had this conversations with a lot of different customers, and it's funny. It's like, well, I don't want that agent just going out and doing whatever it wants on whatever data it wants. And you're like, understand, right? It's not what we want either. That's not what the agent wants to do either, right? the great thing about this is that um, there's no kind of separate security matrix that you need to set up to have the agent run. Yes, the agent lives within OCI, but the agent, we connect into JD Edwards and it understands your JD Edwards security profiles, right? So,
Yeah.
all the work that you've done, this is just more of that theme, right?
Mhm.
All the work you've already done, all the things that you already have set up are what our AI agents utilize to help you, make JD Edwards a more powerful tool. Um, so no duplicated setup of security, right? There's no kind of rogue agents that have this, unfettered or unlimited security. It understands the JD Edwards security profile. It's assigned that profile and it will live within that profile, right? So if there's data it can't touch it, right? It doesn't work it, um, and obviously there's guardrails uh, that um, there's guardrails within the agent as well as what business processes am I trying to accomplish, right? So it's not going off and it's not Skynet, it's not going out trying to figure out all these different things to do. It's trying to improve a business process for you, and it knows and understands your JD Edwards security. So another thing JD Edwards customers don't have to worry about.
Yeah. And let's focus on that last point a little bit more. What does it truly mean for the agent to understand JD security?
Well, what it means is your compliance officers, your IT, your security, they don't have to create new permissions, a new security matrix is just to get AI agents into their organization. You know, in our last podcast, we talked about our AI agents being digital workers, right?
Mhm.
You know, if we think about these as digital workers, these digital workers are assigned a security profile, right? And just like what's exists in JD Edwards today, right? So you don't have to create um, a side or an extra set of security layers for these digital workers, right? Um, what that means is they're only allowed to see what they're allowed to see. They're only allowed to act upon, the way that, the security profile allows them to act. Um, an AP, for instance, that might mean seeing invoices that are actually there to hand, within a certain company, right? Um,
Mhm.
or, being able to review payments, but not enter payment, execute payments, right? Um,
Yeah.
things of that nature. So the agents will follow the same business logic, same security logic that JD Edwards users do, right? Every day.
So, like, why would that matter? Like, it, if you do give your AI agent or digital worker like full control, like, what is that like really such a bad thing? I mean, yes, obviously, I've seen a lot of movies where it says, yes, that's a very bad
It
thing,
seems
but
bad, right? You're right.
yeah.
Well,
But why does that matter to IT and finance leaders that you can control this tool?
yeah, well, I mean, it's all about compliance and governance, right? I mean, when companies are audited today, they go through that process so that they understand roles and responsibilities, and that's all signed off. Now, with this advent of digital workers, they need to do that the same thing, right?
Right.
And these digital workers need to be compliant, right, and need to have governance associated with it. So, you know the last thing IT and finance needs to worry about is some, rogue person, working at 2 in the morning with unlimited security, right? They
Mhm.
don't, by utilizing, the JD Edwards security and the matrix that's set up today, um, they can feel confident and comfortable of that happening at 2 in the morning when people are sleeping,
Yeah.
right? They get real auditability of the workers based upon that security matrix as well, right? Um, and the fact, and we kind of have to go back to that thing that we talked about, because we didn't have to duplicate any data. There's nothing that's happening outside of JD Edwards, so you don't have to worry that JD Edwards stays the system of record. You're not having these side systems that are doing rogue journal entries or whatnot. JD Edwards is the system of record. Its security is the system of record, and our agent works within that framework.
Yeah. Hey, perfect. Perfect jumping off point to this next question. How does keeping JD as a system of record really reduce the risk that some of these companies are facing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the reasons most of our customers and the great JD Edwards community, you know, utilize JD Edwards is because of it being that single source of the truth, right? That one ERP record that they value so much. But we talked about it already too. Since we're not duplicating data, there's no stale data, there's no kind of since there's no duplication of it and there's no action upon it outside of JD Edwards, there's no contradictions between data. There's no reconciliations between what's in and out of JD Edwards, right? There's no duplicate. There's no duplication of duties. Both from a system of security, nothing extra to maintain, um, and updates land where the work is actually happening, right? So AI stays true to that JD Edwards process, right? It's not running outside of JD Edwards, right? Um, you know, I love the fact that, the agent isn't replacing JD Edwards. It's working right in JD Edwards alongside JD Edwards,
Mhm.
with JD Edwards still being that single source of that truth, that system of record. Right.
Yeah. So let's shift a little bit further at
Sure.
when once the agent is actually running, what does the user actually see and do?
Yeah, that's the fun part about the agents, right? The interaction with the agent is really meant to be very practical, right? You know what I mean?
Right.
When you go back and you think about, this is a digital worker. Cool, right? Okay, well, let's understand how you would work with this digital worker, right? Users can see exactly what the agent's doing at any point of time, right? What they've done, what they're doing, what they're going to do, right? But they kind of stay in that driver's seat, right? Um, you know, the experience can be different for any company, right? But typically, the agent, what the users will see is a dashboard, right? That helps them understand a whole bunch of things about the agent, right? Um, and all these things can happen in no particular order, right? It's configurable to however they want to manage and interact with the agent. But things like KPIs about the health of the business process that agent is trying to improve, right? Whether it's the AP agent, you can see how the AP agent has impacted your days payable outstanding. How many one touch invoice how many invoices have been processed via like one touch, right? How many exceptions have been generated, right? You can see kind of that the real time action, the tasks, right? That the agent performing. And most importantly, you can see the exceptions, right? You have those exception dashboards. And this is you know for a lot of our agents, that's the gold, right? It's customers want their people um, managing problems, right, and solving problems for them, right? Where in the past they would spend 90% of their time working on things that are not problems because they have to figure out if it's a problem, right?
Mhm.
And now the agent can figure out if it's a problem and give them that ability to focus on, those truly problematic ones, right? So yeah, it's cool. I mean, it's a new modern feel to JD Edwards. It's a dashboard. You have that view of it. You can look at exceptions, you can look at processing, you can look at, KPI improvements. You can see all of that information real time, kind of a cockpit control panel for that digital worker.
Yeah. And that dashboard is very user friendly from
Yeah.
what I understand. Are there any parts of the dashboard that could be confusing that might need a little extra training, or would you say that it is very straightforward?
Well, I mean, I would say it's very straightforward, but like I said before, for any given company, for any given business process, the dashboard is configurable to how you want your workers to interact with that agent, right? So, for instance, if you didn't want the KPIs on the main screen, you wanted the exception on the main screen, then that's what we deliver, right? That's what our agent, that's how we deliver the agent, right? So you know, the dashboard's really meant to give a very clear kind of picture window into the health of the process, right? Um, and the agent itself, right? And we'll talk. I believe we'll talk about that going forward. But it's the agent is trying to improve a process, right? You know what I mean? So how is the agent doing that? What is the agent doing? And then what has the agent discovered, right? But you can see the volume, you can see the activity, you can watch that agent in real time and look for bottlenecks. You can interact with the agent. You could literally ask it questions while you're in there and say, "Hey, what happened on this invoice?" "Oh, I found a duplicate PO." "Oh, okay. Well, that's great. Thank you for that." Right? So, whatever the agent is doing, that gives the ability for your workers to kind of interact with that in real time.
You gave a very small example there, but let's maybe build it out a little bit.
Sure.
Could you walk us through a simple like AP exception example?
Sure, sure. Let's make it real, right? So,
Yeah.
picture an invoice coming through an email channel for you, right? At 4:45 on a Friday afternoon, right? And so before, your typical AP worker would be like, "Oh, no, you're not a, not a manual." And think about at the end of the month, right? "Oh,
Oh gosh.
I want to get out. It's Friday night. It's been a long week. The agent takes that crack at it, right? You know what I mean? So the agent will ingest it. The agent will look at the date, the invoice itself. It'll give you confidence scoring around, did I find all the right information? Do I have the supplier? Do I know what the matching PO number is on this? Does it have, what's the value? All that stuff, right? So the agent reads the PO, right? It double checks supplier, and if they suppliers on hold or do any of those things. So it does all that stuff that your AP agent wouldn't do. Then it can spot mismatches, right? Is there a duplicate PO? Is there a wrong PO number on that? Is it missing the supplier name or a date associated with it, right? Um, and all of those things as it goes through this process, right? It's checking all these things, right? Check the PO. Yep, the PO's there. Cool. Do a two-way match on the PO. Yeah, oh yeah, that PO has that line. That match is good, right? Two, is this supplier on hold, right? Payment hold for some reason, right? Because it doesn't have a secure, certificate of insurance or whatnot. No, it's all good, right? So, but if it does, it then flags that exception, puts it out to the AP agent itself, um, and then recommends a fix, right? And it says, "Hey, I know you gotta leave. I know you wanna leave. It's 5 o'clock. It's getting close to 5 on Friday, but this one has a duplicate PO number. They sent it in last week, a and it's already in process. What would you like me to do?" And the AP agent could say, "Please get rid of this invoice," you know,
Yeah.
and it's gone, right? Auditability, but we're not paying that invoice twice, right? Um, if it was on credit hold, the agent can ask, or if it's on payment hold, the agent can ask, can you check the payment hold for this supplier real time? They can go out and say, oh, yes, I've seen that they've actually updated their certificates insurance. I can take off that credit hold. Would you like me to execute? That would be great. Right? So it's not, so it does that work. It does all the tasks, but it flags exceptions, but more importantly, it interacts with your people to make recommendations about the best possible outcomes, right? And your AP clerk still gets to walk out at, 4:55 on the Friday without having to stay late. So everybody's happy.
Yeah. So we've been talking about why is it so easy and how can you make it easier? Where should a customer look to decide where an AI agent actually makes sense?
Oh, Nate, that would mean they didn't listen to my last podcast though, right? So,
You're correct.
right. So, because we talked about that, right? Um, the combo was, we got to start with a real business process, right? Not like, hey, this is a really cool thing, right? Well, let's start with a real problem, right? A process that's very repetitive, that's time consuming, that has a lot of exceptions, um, that there would be valuable, measurable impact to the organization to improve, right? These aren't science projects, right?
Hmm.
These are real life problems that the agents are built to fix, right? So, you know, think about those business processes that are truly causing you problems, right? Map it out. Find where the problems are, right? We just kind of did an example and it's like, maybe I kind of alluded to how the agent could solve the problem, but for instance, quite often, these suppliers get put on hold for certain reasons, and then they don't get unput off hold, right? You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Even if they should be unput, even if that hold should come off, um, they don't. The system doesn't necessarily automatically do that, right? It's sometimes it takes personal, people to intervene and do that. Now, we could have agents do that, right? But let's just say we don't from that process. Well, that agent can go out and do all those kind of look for things like that to help improve that process. But, you map out the process, figure, what's causing the bottlenecks, what's causing the problems, where are people doing that research and detective work? Because that's what takes the time, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's, you know, it's not necessarily out of the JD Edwards, key punching. It's all the research, all the phone calls, all the emails that they have to make just to get a simple answer to a simple question, right? Um, and then figure out if it's a job for orchestration or an AP agent, right? Most of the time it could be a little bit of both, but we'll figure out how to automate this process from that, that would be the one to check, the one to improve, the one to monitor, you know, it's not chasing technology, you're solving problems, right? So let's
Mhm.
focus on solving problems.
So we're obviously this podcast has all been about that it's easier than ever. Let's
Yep.
try to make it a little bit more easy for some of these buyers out there that are looking for AI. What should these buyers avoid when they're trying to start looking at AI?
Yeah, I mean, again, I mean, this is the old, hey, it's not a science project, right? It's not
Mhm.
shiny new technology, right? It is new technology and it's wonderful, but um, it's not technology for technology's sake, right? Um, and then the classic problem would be going too big, too fast, too quickly. Trying to automate everything at once. You know what I mean? We can go back to even more a simpler um we'll go back to our AP agent. It's like, okay, um we can have an agent that ingests these invoices and gets them into the system and does all the checks for us. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe we don't want that same agent to also do a whole bunch of supplier qualification and management. Maybe that's a different agent, or maybe we don't want that agent automatically creating payment groups and cutting checks, you know. So, think about the things that are causing problems first, um, and focus on those, right? Uh, don't grab a process that nobody truly owns, right? You know what I mean? Because,
Mhm.
that's one of those ones where, um, you never get consensus, you never get a clear vision on how to improve it, right? Um, don't don't discredit, kind of the security, data quality, as well.
Right.
Um, those are important elements to think about. I mean, agents can improve data quality, right? But, if you're, if the problems that you're having, um, are about data quality, then the process is still going to be hard, right?
Mhm.
Maybe you focus the agent on improving the data quality first, and then build the agent to execute the process second, right? Um, don't don't simply go for an agent when an orchestration would do, right? Um, and that's something that we feel strongly about as well, right? And then, you know, when you get, when you have figured out that process and you figured out the uh how the agent will work, it's up to you about how you want that agent to interact with JD Edwards. How much autonomy do you want to give that agent, right? You can start out with the agent making recommendations, and then when you see um, the quality of the work of that digital worker, then you can start slowly turning the dials on that agent to let them do more stuff autonomously, right? So start with a business process. Don't you know, don't start with, you know, I've got to automate everything. Start with a business process that's going to make sense.
Yeah. If you want more information about how clean data can help you in your AI journey, check out our podcast. Your AI won't work without clean data in JD Edwards. It's with one of our very good friends, Manuel Neira. It was
Mhm.
published back in March, but he really does break down exactly where you should be looking and what infrastructure you should have before you make this switch and go with AI. But I'll get you out of here with this last question.
Sure.
What would you tell a JDE customer who is interested in AI agents or digital coworkers, but hesitant to make that jump?
Well, what I would tell them is that you're so close to making AI
Hmm.
agents a reality within your organization. There is so little that you need to change. Um, I think a lot of people or a lot of customers are thinking that, and it was a lot of the things that we talked about today, right? Do I have to migrate to the cloud? Do I have to replicate data? Do I have to create security, a shadow security matrix to be able to manage it? No, 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 right? I mean, you I guarantee you, you have everything in place to make AI work for your business today. You know,
Right.
what you need to do, you don't have to worry about that. Think about now what you should be focusing on is the business processes that you need to improve upon, right? Um, you don't have to move to the cloud. You don't have to change security, right? You don't have to replicate data. You just need to figure out within your organization what are those high value business processes, those repetitive, manually intensive business processes that we can improve. That's going to give your organization the freedom to grow and to transform, while having the agents do that work, right? And yeah, I mean, I also think that you need to have the right partner in your corner, right? And I think that ERP Suites is doing the way we're looking, at digital workers and AI agents for JD Edwards is unique in the industry, and it's unique for all the things we just talked about, right? That we built our whole structure and our whole kind of foundation between with AI agents is how do they seamlessly work with JD Edwards without having to, how do they work with JD Edwards today, the way the customers use JD Edwards, right? The way that customers have configured how they, where it lives, where it runs, how security. We don't want you to have to do anything extra. We just want you to be able to think about your business process and work with us to help us build those agents to improve your business.
Yeah,
You're close.
exactly.
You're close.
Yeah.
I mean, that,
Yeah.
you're a lot closer than you think.
Um, But if your team is wondering where AI agents could actually help inside JD Edwards, ERP Suites can help you evaluate the opportunity, map the right use case, and build a practical roadmap around your current JDE environment. The goal is not to chase AI hype, it is to use the right platform, the right JDE connection, and the right controls to make your existing processes easier, faster, and more reliable. Visit erpsuites.com today to connect with our ERP Suites team and Kevin Van Horn. But that's a wrap on today's episode of Not Your Grandpa's JD Edwards. The big takeaway is this: AI agents are easier for JD Edwards customers when they are built on a platform that can work with JD Edwards in real time using existing data and security and help users manage real business exceptions. This is not about replacing JD Edwards. It's about expanding what JDE can do with the right platform and the right partner. Huge shout out to you, Kevin, for joining us today and helping make this topic a little more practical. Seriously, this has been incredible. This is very eye-opening for at least me, and I know for a lot of our viewers out there. But if this episode was helpful, subscribe, leave a like, share it with someone on your finance, IT, operations, or leadership team. But until next time, keep modernizing, keep asking better questions, and remember, this is not your grandpa's JD Edwards.